My talk today really is about a new approach to first responder training, and I base this on a number of reasons, really, because over the years, and indeed even during the discussions we've had here, certainly I would say that some of you would consider that the definition of a first responder is a little bit too narrow. And my own opinion is that it's definitely time for a change, and that the change that I'm talking about is to broaden the base, broaden the experience level of first responders. There probably isn't anybody in this room that doesn't recognize the importance of the first responder in the first place and the intervention in the field. And this is key because often people would consider that a first responder can be just a bystander or something like that. Well, that bystander probably isn't going to be much good unless they've received training, and unless they've received training in the complete set of skills that are required for a recovery, say, of somebody from the water, somebody walking up a mountain. And for instance, you might be the best person at CPR on the planet, but if you're not able to take the person out of the water because you haven't developed or haven't received the necessary training or one thing or another, you're probably never going to get to practice your CPR skills. And similarly, if you're able to retrieve the person but you're not bringing your A game on the CPR side or the packaging side or post that, you're probably going to be missing the mark as well. So what I'm proposing to do is really to start it off and say, well, what is a first responder? We have this term when we bandy it around and we say, first responder, we need a first responder as the one around. Well, what is a first responder first? What's this person supposed to do? And if you look at a lot of the definitions, and you can read away, I'm not really going to go over them, you can see that a lot of the definitions, the FEC, that's the Pre-Hospital Emergency Care Council in Ireland, that would be their definition of a first responder, emergency first responder. The other one is my favorite, Wikipedia, which always gives me an answer to something, whether it's right or wrong. But it narrows it down again, and it says, but it always comes back sort of to the medical side. It always says, you know, you've got to have skills. Now, the FEC one does say additional knowledge and additional skills. Well, that's great, but what additional knowledge and what additional skills? Now, I work with a number of groups and a number of people who would be on the same page as me. Now, I know some people aren't on the same page as me, but we sort of have come up with a definition of what we think a first responder should be, and I am going to read this one because a first responder is any person. That's the first thing. It's any person. It doesn't have to be, you know, who is capable of intervening in the field. So they've got to be capable when an emergency arises. So I'm not just talking about drowning. I'm talking about any emergency. That might be a child swallowing a gobstopper or something like that. I'm just talking about that in such a way so as to positively contribute within their level of ability and the available resources. Because if you're in the field, you know, it doesn't matter what gizmos, what shiny objects they have in the hospital, you don't have those in the field. And to the best possible outcome, you can only do as much as you can do with what you have and your level of training. So I think that's a much better definition. I would like some of you maybe to take that definition away and use it. I would be quite happy about that. But I feel at the moment, with first responder training, it reminds me a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, one of these 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles that you buy. And everybody wants to do the castle in the middle of the puzzle because that's the bit they like. But when it comes to the sky and every bit looks the same, and people say, oh, well, and that jigsaw puzzle sits on the table for months with the sky never done, but the castle completed. And I think that's where we really are, excuse me, with first responder training. And I think currently, and I say this within my experience level, is that first responder training often lacks context. It is sometimes too narrowly focused. It often, and I've seen this time and time again, lacks ground truthing. It's all very well to do it in a nice warm classroom on a Wednesday afternoon with the central heating on, but you take that same person out and you get them to do exactly that somewhere else in the field, and it doesn't kind of work out so well. In some cases, the taught approaches simply don't work in the field. And I'd put a caveat there, unless there's significant training in the process of that, and that might be from throwing a throw bag or whatever it is. And then sometimes first responder training is confusing for people, especially if they come back. I mean, if you have occupational first aid in this country, you go and do your occupational first aid over 3 days, then 2 years later, you come back and do a bit more. Well, I guarantee you most people in this room, including myself, will have probably forgotten what you did 2 years previously. And I think what we really need to look at it is we need to say, really, what does it have to be? Well, it has to be in my mind, and it has to be in my colleagues' mind. It has to be relevant to the situations in which you work. It has to be applicable. In other words, you have to be able to apply it. It has to be holistic in focus, so I want to get that person out, I want to treat them, I want to package them, I want to send them away. I want to do the whole thing. I want to have that knowledge, that skills base to do that. I just don't want to be able to do one little bit. It must be implementable. It must be understandable. If I don't understand what I'm doing, then I'm going to have a problem when the balloon goes up. It must be all-inclusive, and overall, it must be effective. So what I'm doing, it must have a positive, or as much as I can do, to have a positive outcome. Okay, so really, where did I come to this, not a eureka moment, but to this approach? And I suppose it all started 22 years ago. I joined a law enforcement, a fisheries agency 22 years ago. And prior to that, I'm a marine biologist, oceanographer, and my PhD is in sustainable development of biological systems. Absolutely, you'd say, probably very little to do with this. And you'd be right. Of course you'd be right. But this law enforcement agency, this fisheries law enforcement agency I joined, I found out that when I arrived, a little while before they lost 4 officers in the course of their duty. 5 of them went to sea and only 1 came back. So this was a seed change for this organization. And because I've had a lot of experience in the marine environment before I joined the fisheries, I was tasked with implementing a lot of what the standard operating procedures were after, as you can imagine, the investigation into why these officers died. So we looked at that and we took all this advice, and then we started this journey. And this is really the journey we're talking about. And I know Kevin mentioned that he's never pulled anybody from the water who was a non-swimmer. Well, I've been surfing for over 40 years. I have never seen anyone drown. The worst I've seen is 1 shoulder dislocation and a number of fin cuts and a bit of reef cuts. And I've surfed all over the world. So I'm not sure who's drowning, because they're not the people I see either. So the training that I did have, though, or I do have in the academic world, would have taught me how to problem solve. So here we had a problem, and the goal was we never want to see this happen again. That was the goal. And you can understand the reason why you would have a goal like that after losing 4 officers at sea. And so how do you go about doing that? And for me, the obvious way was through a systems approach. And a systems approach is no more than putting all the parameters into a big hat, making sure you've got all those parameters into a big hat, taking them all out, putting them together, and then making sense of them and say, okay, well, that's how we're going to do it. And that model looks really complex, but it's not. All it's saying is get all these parameters, put them in. Don't miss any. Don't miss any of these holes. So, for instance, when we did that, we decided, okay, and here's one that you probably would relate to, and I know I spoke to Linda about this earlier on, is that if I put a bucket on the floor here, and I gave every one of you a pebble, and I asked you, well, I can't move, but I asked you to throw your pebble into the bucket, and I put 10 euros, I'm cheap, I put 10 euros over there as a bet to see how many would get the pebble in the bucket. How many do you think would get it in? From where you're sitting now, stand up, underarm, pebble in the bucket. How many? Very few, I would say. I would say very few of you would get anywhere near the bucket. Some of them will probably hit me, and some of them might go in the screen. Okay, that's where they'd end up. And the point of that is that you're often given a throw rope, and you say, put that throw rope in your boat, put that throw rope in your car, and use that throw rope if somebody falls in. And we've also run that experiment where we got all these throw ropes and said, okay, there's the person in the water, throw the throw rope. Well, those throw ropes went everywhere you can think. Now, some of them did, some of them went home, but the more they practiced, the better they got. Now you pull that object along the water, through the water, they're in a current. Now you make them go further out. A throw rope has 20 meters of rope line in it. That's a long way to throw. That's a long way to throw a bag of rope. So that's really what we did. And this has been the continuous process that we've used for all of our trialing, all of our drilling, I suppose you'd call it, is we identify and we analyze the exposures. So what would be the exposure for our guys who go to sea? There would be numerous ones. There'd be weather, there'd be tides, there'd be getting to the water, because they launch the boats using ribs down slippery slips, and they're covered in weed, and then we could have adverse weather conditions, etc. The list is endless. But what we tried to do was we tried to simulate all of those and then drill them. So there was no point saying, okay, well, we'll get the guys to do this. So the example of the throw ropes was a very real one, because not only did the fishery officers that I would have worked with go to sea, they spend most of their time in pairs walking up rivers. So using a throw bag is really, really important, and they can do that because there's two guys and, definitive care, 1 hour. An ambulance isn't going to get to most of them in an hour from where they'd be working in Kerry or somewhere like that. So it's important that they have those skills, but they only have those skills when they continue to use them and practice them. And this is going to be another issue I'm going to talk about in a minute, is how often do you practice those skills? Because I mentioned OFA say, go on the 3-day course, you go on the 3-day course, you do this, come back 2 years later, we give you another certificate. And, the organization has ticked the box. They're quite happy, they've ticked the box, so they're okay. But how skillful is that person? And how broad and how applicable is that? So when we started this journey 22 years ago, we sort of, okay, well, how are we going to do that? And a number of us, we did a sort of a medical side, we did an operations side, we did a non-technical skills side. So it's not only any good becoming all of these things, and we become all of these things, but things like communication. How do you supply support services to somebody? These are things that you're sometimes not taught. So we really try to be holistic in our thinking and say, okay, well, we're going to make sure that we can drill down, and I'm a remote EMT with ACLS, etc. And those skills we transfer across and say, okay, well, that's the CPR side, that's that bit. So now let's try and get the recovery side. So we looked at it, and we looked at, okay, manual handling. And okay, a quick example of that, we would simulate exercises with one group that I work with. Let's say I'm out surfing with, I'll use you again, Linda. I'm out surfing with Linda, and we're out there together, remote beach. Linda's bought her A game on the CPR, okay, but she loses me in the surf. She comes in, she finds me face down in 6 inches of water. What does she do? Well, isn't it 30 minutes? Good. You're sharp. So what does she do? Well, she's been taught that she has to take me up the beach, and she has to do that. Well, Linda, I weigh 92 kilos, a 6'4", 3 wetsuit is another 5 kilos, pair of booties is 1 kilo. I'm close to 100 kilos now. Linda's not a big lady. She's going to find it hard to move me up the beach. So what techniques could Linda be taught to move me, 100 kilos, from the surf zone, far enough up the beach in order to actually be able to do anything with me? Okay, so those skills are there, those skills are out there. You can learn those skills. But if you don't know them, then there's a problem. Because the problem is that when that balloon goes up, when she sees me face down in the water, she knows she has to protect my airway. But now all the other training she had was on the Wednesday afternoon in the classroom with the central heating on. Now that's a problem. That's a big, big problem in first responder training. We also had concurrently a technological revolution within fisheries because of this. We started off 22 years ago with next to no equipment, and there would be a large body of thought out there who would say, okay, we can solve this problem with technology. All right, and to a degree they are correct. You can save, you can contribute to the process with technology. There is a big problem here, because what I would say to you with technology is that yes, it has a place, but it is inclined to dilute human skills. It's inclined to dilute your skill set and dilute your awareness. And here's a bowl of water on the screen here. And if I said to you, I want you to tell me within 10 degrees how hot or cold that water is in that bowl. Well, you would use a number of your skills that you have, your life skills. So you would look at the bowl for a start and you would say, well, that bowl's glass. That bowl conducts heat. You would say that. I believe you would say that. You would also look at the bowl and say, well, there's no steam coming out of it. Okay, so it's not boiling. You'd look at the bowl, well, there's no bubbles coming up, so it's probably not boiling. There's no ice crystals in the bowl, so it's probably not frozen. So you've made a number of determinations, and you haven't even gone near the bowl yet. All right? Now, you would say, okay, what am I going to do now? Well, I could probably turn my hands over and touch the edge of the bowl like that with my hands. And I can see, and I can pull them away really quickly if it's hot. Well, you do that and you find, well, that's not too hot. And after a while, you go through all of these things and you put your hand over the water and you put your finger in the water and say, yeah, well, okay, that's like a cup of tea or something like that. Okay, now we do the same thing and I say to you, okay, I'm going to apply the technology here. And this is a bit of a labored example, but I think it demonstrates it. I give you 3 pairs of gloves. Now, those gloves are going to protect your hands. They're going to be really, really good at protecting your hands. Now, I ask you the same question. I say to you, how warm is that water? Now, all of those life skills that you've had, you can only use some of them now, because now you've got your sight, maybe you've got your smell, but you're losing some of those skills. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, a lot of you would be sailors, a lot of you would be boats people. You go onto a boat now, and you see how many people are using electronic charts, and they don't even have on board any paper charts, navigation charts, or that the ones that they have on board aren't in date. Now, you would be really surprised, because I meet people all the time, they have a Garmin GPS on their boat, and they just follow nautical charts on this. I mean, if I said to you, do you think it's a good, sensible thing to bring your television and put it into a boat in a wet environment? I think you'd probably tell me it's not. But that's the risk you're taking, because that's an electronic device, and electronics and water, as far as I've ever been able to sort out, they're not really compatible. So we've banged this drum, and believe me, we've banged this drum a long, long time. For the last 10 years, we've been banging this, and we've been saying, well, okay, let's have this holistic approach. Let's do this. Let's see if it's going to work. And we've given every excuse under the sun. It's going to be too expensive. It's too difficult to implement. You require too much training. Our guys will be away from their core duties for too long. All of these reasons, and all of them are valid. I can't argue with those reasons. But that doesn't mean to say because something is difficult, you shouldn't do it. I mean, walking or climbing up Everest is difficult, but people do it. Swimming the Channel is difficult, but people do it. So whether that's a good enough excuse to say, no, it's not, we're not going to do it because of those reasons, I don't think they're valid reasons. I think if we keep doing that, we're going to keep doing the same old thing year on year. And that's why we're saying we've got to change it, because we believe if the mindset changes, it is possible to do that. But we said to ourselves, okay, well, maybe they're right. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe, we're skewed as to what we're thinking. Maybe it's just not the way to go. And here enters the controversy, because what we decided to do was we said, okay, well, let's test all the reasons that they said. And the sort of reasons that we were given, the reasons were, they get lots of experience from the workshops and conferences they attend. Well, hunky-dory. Online learning. This is a brilliant source, and it is a good source for learning, and I would agree that in some cases it is. Okay, we'll send them on courses once in a while, and that'll be really good for them. They can study the scientific literature, and we've had some good academic discussions here today, and that's true as well. And we'll actually review somebody who we think probably is doing this already, and we decided to have a look at the Irish lifeguard training system here and say, okay, well, are they doing this? These are beach lifeguards on the beach. Let's see what happens. So the first thing we did was we did the workshop and conference learning, and this is the controversy, and it is still very controversial. But I attended a conference about this time last year in France, and part of the conference was an on-beach session in which I deliberately did some pretty appalling CPR, expecting at any moment for someone to say, look, that's not really how you should do this. I didn't get any feedback. Another one of my colleagues said, or went to a mass training exercise, and he did some very substandard secondary surveys on the casualties that they had. And my third colleague, he went to another training exercise, and they were less than perfect casualty reports that he wrote. All of those very significant, serious bits of the puzzle, if you want to look at it like that. None of us received any correspondence. So what we did was we wrote to all of the organizers, and this is obviously, yes, you can imagine where the controversy came in. We wrote to all the organizers and told them what we'd done, and it was an observational thing. Now, fair dues to the guys in France, the conference that I went to, they wrote back and said, yeah, well, look, we recognize there are issues with our practicals on the beach or one thing or another. So I was very pleased with that. We've yet to hear from the other two parties. So all I can say is I think that I think it was a very interesting exercise. Whether we should go do it again, I'm not sure. But it certainly has pointed out that if they didn't pick us up, who else haven't they picked up? What other parts of it haven't they picked up? So from the takeaway message for me from that is checks and balances, guys. If you don't have those checks and balances in, then you run the risk of things just slipping through the cracks and people basically walking away thinking they're competent when in fact they're not. Online learning, I learn lots of things online. I learn how to take the carburetor out of a car, with YouTube. It's brilliant, okay? It's really good. And there are some excellent videos on everything you can possibly think of on there. So we looked at it and we said, okay, well, how much learning could you do online? Well, I think you can do quite a lot, providing that there's a caveat there that you're very careful in what you look at and that it's peer-reviewed or it's accepted as mainstream and norm. So we said, okay, well, what do we got here? Let's look at Bondi Rescue. And Bondi Rescue is, I'd say, globally accepted as being, pretty cutting edge. It's Australian, guys. And sorry about that. But, it's accepted as being, it's also free for view if we look at any of the clips on that. So that was important too. So, and it's very well known. And I think what I want to show you here now is I want to show you two clips. So you could go on. The point is that let's say you're there, you've done your occupational first aid or emergency first responder, and you want to brush up on it yourself. Now you're going to go on and you're going to look at the guys, as far as you're concerned, because they're on Irish TV every single day, these guys doing the correct procedures. So you go on and you start and you watch this one first.
A man found floating, life lost in the surf. His name is Takahiro Ono, an English language student from Tokyo. No one knows what's happened to him or how long he's been in the water.
Okay. I'm now going to show you another one that's immediately after that one on YouTube. If you search drowning resuscitation Bondi Beach or something, I can't remember exactly what we used for that. But I'm going to show you the next one. Now, I'm not criticizing any of these, and they're all dateable if you go on and you can see the dates on them, the date of publishing. But the next one is this one.
A swimmer dragged from the surf is not breathing. With no pulse, he is clinically dead. To restart his heart, lifeguards remain in the fluid. Is now clinically dead with 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop that there, but I think the point is, and all of you know the differences between all of those two videos that you saw there, okay? I mean, there were lots of differences between them. The point is, for the person who isn't knowledgeable, do you consider then, is that a good training medium for that person? So you can go on to YouTube and you can search, I'm going to search drowning, resuscitation, and you see 2 different techniques being used. Now, that's all very well to see 2 different techniques being used, providing that you know the publishing date, and this is one of the things that we really found, not only for this, but for the treatment of hill walking injuries and everything else, is the production date often doesn't match the publication date. Okay, so you could be looking at some CPG, clinical practice guideline of 15 years ago, but it's only just been published. Some guy put it up there. There's no peer review. There's no policing of what goes on to YouTube. So that would be the warning message, is that I think it's very important. I think it's a very good learning source, but I think there are difficulties for people who go on and just think they're going to learn it from there. So the next one we looked at was really short courses, and this was very much an in-house thing in the fisheries, where we employed external contractors to give various courses. Now, within the public sector, and a lot of you probably, I think, work in the public sector, there's one thing that accountants look at, and when you go to tender, that's the price, not necessarily the quality of the service. Okay, so it is extremely difficult to justify an extra 40% on top of the cost when some guy's charging you $1,000 and the other guy's charging you $1,400 to deliver a course. So you have to have very, very good reasons of why you are using the more expensive one. Now, we found that in order to become an OFA instructor in Ireland, you need to go on an OFA course, and then you need to go and do a week. So technically, you could become an OFA instructor in 2 weeks, and you could come back and deliver OFA courses in the public domain. Now, the difficulty with that is that you might have no background in that. On the other hand, you might get somebody who's extremely knowledgeable, and we've had really, really good guys and girls coming in and saying, okay, and they have a wealth of information, delivering exactly the same course. And I think that we managed to get over it and we get around it, because what we used to do is, in the tender documents that we issued, we specified how much training and how much background those people needed. But we certainly didn't do it in the beginning, and I think we came short because of that we had some people whose delivery of those courses were not what they should be. And I think that's an important thing to remember as well. On the scientific literature side, we looked at this, and there's such a wealth, obviously, of scientific literature on drowning and everything else. But one of the things we found where first responders were involved, and I talked to a number of lifeguards about this, and we ground truthed a lot of it actually with lifeguards, including the clips you saw a minute ago. And I said to them, will you understand it, and one thing and another? And they said, yeah. And, that's the kind of answer you get from a 20-year-old, yeah, because they basically don't want to give you the real answer. So we decided never to do any interviews. We had conversations. So as soon as we called it an interview with these people, it was the party line, or it was yeah, we understand. But when it was just a chat, we got much better feedback from these guys. So we looked at the scientific literature and we said to them, okay, I got a paper just the other day, and it's from the Wilderness Medical Society, and highly respected, obviously, publication and one thing or another. So an organization indeed. And when I read the publication about in-water rescues, we started talking again about pulse checking. Pulse checking. And this is 2016, and I'm thinking, well, hang on a second. If I go to resus.org UK, we're into not breathing, or we're breathing, we're talking about, in this case, they're not very easy to see, not breathing normally. And now we're back into pulse checking. And then I went back a year into the Wilderness Medical Society publications and saw exactly the same thing, not breathing normally. The pulse check thing just came in. Well, everybody in this room, if you swim out 100 meters, I would say to pretty much most of you in this room, if you swim out 100 meters and you get to your casualty, and it's a real casualty situation, you try and find a carotid pulse in a 4-foot swell. And I wish you luck there, because we've tried to do it in fairly flat water. It's a nightmare. It's you're just going to waste your time doing it. And that's my own personal opinion. I think it's a retrograde step to start looking for pulses when really what that person needs is respiration. That person needs oxygen. So whether you give them in-water rescue breaths, take them out beyond the break, or whatever, however you do it, if you start looking for that. So that was confusing. So I said to the lifeguards, what do you draw from that? And they were confused. They didn't know what to say. And that's the problem. If you confuse people when you're trying to train them, that's not good. I taught in a school, I taught 16-year-olds chemistry for 3 years when I was doing my master's degree. And chemistry is boring at the best of times for 16-year-old boys, let me tell you that. So you had to try and make it exciting, and you had to try and make it very understandable. And I think that's where we are with this and lifeguards. We said to them, okay, well, what do you think? And they said, well, we're not really sure now. And I think what's necessary here, and it's not sort of my role, it's the role of people like Mike Tipton and Linda and others who sit on various committees to try and make this as understandable and as consistent internationally as possible. Because if I have one set of guidelines in America, one set of guidelines in the UK, and they're conflicting, I've got a problem. Which ones do I use? Now, it's all very well when you're here and you're saying, well, you have all this experience, but these guys don't. First responders, by and large, don't. You're trying to teach them a whole wealth of endeavors, and you're trying to make sure that they understand what you're saying. So if we could just be consistent across the board, I think that would be a great bonus for everybody in the training side. So then the last one we looked at was, we just looked at, okay, well, how are the Irish lifeguards trained under Irish water safety? And they are very myopic. They're very, very narrowly focused in that they can all swim really well, and they can get around the buoy, and they can get a paddleboard and paddle out and paddle back really quickly. But they don't even have an occupational first aid training requirement in Ireland for a lifeguard. So we would have our office-based staff would be higher qualified in first aid than Irish lifeguards would be. And I don't really want to dwell on that because that's obviously a very political thing as well. But I think that's certainly something that needs to be looked at. And so in conclusion, we consider, and I'm sure maybe this applies to some of you guys, that we consider the focus in Ireland just too narrow on first responders, these people who we hope are going to make a difference. And that there is a very real requirement to empower first responders so they're able to function in various scenarios. I think that's our responsibility here, guys. I think, if you're going to ask someone to do a job, make sure you give them the right tools to do it. Thank you very much.